Hello everybody, welcome back to the shop. On the operating table today we got a Wico OC Magneto. These are pretty commonly used on oil field engines. We've got a couple of them. I've got four. Two are good, two are bad. When I was trying to run my Bessemer this summer show, I grabbed both of my bad ones and the engine wouldn't run, believe it or not. These are very similar to a Wico EK on the inside. There's two coils. We're going to take it apart and see. But both coils have to be good, of course, and one coil had gone bad in both of my mags, and as a result you will get spark on the bench. If you clamp this in a vise and trip the trip lever on the back, you will get a spark. I was getting a bright 1/4 inch 3/8 blue snappy spark, but under compression it falls on its face. So we got to replace the coils. So while we're in there, also going to replace the condenser. I'm not going to replace the points. I don't know if they're available. They might be the same as EK. I'll clean them up a little bit if they seem to need cleaning, but this does make sparks, so I don't think I'm going to, I might not mess with it. Now the coils I purchased from Mark's Magneto in Connecticut, Colchester, Connecticut. They're a reasonable price. They're, as you can see, very nicely made. So I got a couple sets of these to rebuild my mags and to have a spare set. So let's tear this apart. Just like a lot of other old things, you really only need a flathead screwdriver and an adjustable wrench to take it apart, which is pretty nice. There's just 4 screws to take this cover off. And pull that cover off. Set that aside. And that's all that's inside there. If you've ever seen the inside of a EK, you'll notice it looks very similar, except these magnets are much bigger than a Wico EK. And even though the coils look similar, apparently the coils are different as well compared to an EK. For those of you not familiar with the innards of this, these are the points right here. These are the 2 coils, these are the magnets, and behind this brass bar, these wires go to it, is the condenser. Alright, so we're going to start by taking the back cover off. Behind this oil wicking here, you pull this out, there's a screw hiding behind that. There's a screw here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 small ones. So we'll zip those out. And I'll take the back cover off. I'll also move the felt things. There's the back. Now you can see how the spark advance and retard lever works. There is a cam that moves this little slot, and that slot engages this little finger here. And this trip lever is on the same shaft as this, but it's on an eccentric. So you can kind of see it move in a eccentric, wonky sort of fashion, and that changes the point that it will pop the armature off of the magnet cores. So now on the front side, take off this brass cover plate. That uncovers where the condenser goes. One other thing I forgot to mention as I was initially taking this apart, taking the cover off and showing the insides. See these 2 little spikes here on the coils? A spring bridges that gap, and that connects the high tension coil of both coils. This spring is missing because I previously took this mag apart and took that spring out so I could measure the resistance of the coil. So we got this off, keep the screws in there so you know where they came from. Here we can see the original condenser. There's a little stuck in there. Got spare condensers, so I'll be replacing this. Ooh, that is sticky. Anyway, there's the original condenser. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, it says Wico on it. It's an original one. Now I'll get this condenser out of the way. We're going to throw this away. We don't need it, so I'll loosen this screw here, pull out the wire, and then there's a tiny little nut there. If you have a wrench for that, good for you. And if not, it's not very tight. Well, usually. So you can just loosen that and slide the wire out of its guide. Now let's take a look at how these are wired. Like I said, there's a spring across these 2 points for the high tension coil, or high tension side of the coil, and these buttons here are the other end of the high tension windings. The low tension windings of each coil, this is one of one coil, this is the other of the other coil. One coil goes to the top of the points, the other coil goes to this frame ground here. Then on the back side, you see there's a jumper wire. So it jumpers the 2 coils in series. So we're going to need to do a little bit of soldering when we put this back together. Now we got to take the armature off. To do that, we have to remove this spring. For however big it looks, it's actually not compressed very much. There's a little retainer pin. Slide that out. Take the keeper off. The spring. Keep all this stuff stacked together so you know where it came from. There's a couple felt washers for lubrication. Then you can pop this apart. Oh, I forgot, I have to remove this spring here. I already loosened that screw, so I didn't loosen it enough, I guess. I took that spring out of there. I'm going to put this screw and clip back in so I don't lose it. Now I can take the armature off. And that's that. There's the surface of the points. They actually look pretty nice. Maybe I'll clean them up a little bit depending on my my mood at the time. Now we're getting pretty close to being able to slide these coils off, but these 2 pieces are still in the way. So let's remove these wires. Now take this front points holder off. There's just these 2 screws. Slide that out. There's that. Set that aside with the screws in it. I guess I can pull this spring out. See, there's a spring, and down in there there's a washer. Again, we'll set those aside next to the other spring. Now to pull this off, I got to pull these screws out here in the back. Now a word of caution, these screws go all the way through and hold these cores onto the rest of the framework that holds the magnets together. So once you pull this back piece off, put the screws back in so you keep everything together. Now this assembly can come out. Put these screws back together, or back in. And there you go. Now we're down to the main base, or the basic base here. There's this piece of something in between the coils. It actually looks like it's like a lacquered fabric or something. Covered the spring, possibly to shield the lubrication that runs in this center area for the armature shaft and everything. This possibly keeps that away from the points. I'm not really sure, but this came out in one piece, so I'll save this and put it back in. Snip that. Now these can just be kind of wedged out. Some of them, I can see this one has some little wedges in here, or shims, little wooden shim. So if it comes out hard, that's probably why. And I'm going to save these for reuse. Might need them again when I'm putting the new coils on. So now I can put the new coils back in. Now these are oriented top to bottom and side to side. Here's the little spiky thing for the high tension output. Those were higher up towards the magnet, so this is definitely goes like that. Slide it down. Now these are loose, so I'm going to reuse these little wedges to fasten these back together. Okay, so I just mocked this up before I put any wedges in or soldered any wires, and I realized that these new coils aren't quite the same as the old ones in the location of these tabs. As you see, these little high tension pins are in the right spot, and these buttons are right in front, but the low tension tabs are all in line, which then gets in the way of this trip spring. The original coils, these tabs were clocked more up here like this, so the spring could get by. So they have to be oriented like this, so what I'm going to do, not a big deal, I'm going to solder on these and then bend these 180 degrees over on top of themselves to get them out of the way. I have a little bit of paste flux. It makes my life a little bit easier. Some solder, flux core, rosin core. I believe this is 60-40. My soldering iron. Yep, it's up to temperature. Got a bead of solder on there to transfer the heat to the joint. There we go. Got one solder joint down. Got this piece of whatever it is. I'm going to put that back in. And the spring, well, this washer went down first. Slide that on, and then the spring. Now our points mount. I'm going to put that on. This goes on the front. So that's back in place. These are tightened down. I can put the armature back on. Slide that in there. We got this little spring. I'm going to reattach that. Spring has a loop, a full loop on it, so we got to take the screw all the way out. Get that back in there. I'll just screw it in loosely because we're going to put one of our coil wires on here. There we go. And slide this wire in here. Tighten that screw down all the way. Might as well put this spring back on and these lubricating washers, felt washers. I'll put a little bit of oil on there. And the spring. push that down. I can just slide that retainer pin in. There we go. Now before we put this front cover on, we got to put the condenser back in. This is a new condenser. It's a tight fit, but it does fit. So one lead will go in here, along with the other primary wire from the coil. So here's the spring I selected out of my spring pile. The original one was wound a little closer and the wire I think was a little bit thicker, but this should work fine. And the original also had a piece of shrink tube of some sort around it. So I imagine just for insulation. So I have a piece of shrink tube and I'm going to do the same thing. Alright, so I'll slide the springy in there. This spring connects the high tension coils of both coils. You could solder that. I think some people have. If you do that, you have to be very careful because the secondary wires, the high tension coil wires, are very, very, very fine. I believe they're 40 something gauge, high 30s, low 40s, very thin stuff, thinner than a human hair, I believe. If you put too much heat in there, you'll cook them. So this is a lot safer of a option here, just putting that spring on, but you could solder a wire if you so desire. Now I'll take our brass cover bar, get that in there. Now it is actually time to put it back together. Just when you're putting it, reassembling it, make sure this notch here in the timing adjustment rod, make sure the flat part is nice and vertical because it can rotate, and just put it in a middle position, and then the finger that goes into that, put that into a middle-ish position as well so it'll align. Now I'll drop it in there. I'm just going to keep an eye on it, make sure it goes into that slot, which it did. Now I'll flip it over. And put the screws back in. Now I'll put this gasket back on. I don't even know if you would call this a gasket, maybe a dust shield or something. It's just a piece of woven fabric ribbon, like a really wide shoelace. Nothing holds it in place, no RTV, no Indian head or anything, just like that. And you don't really need the gasket, I guess, but it was there, so I'm gonna keep it there. Now take a look at the inside of the cover, make sure these little contact springs are in good shape. They're still there. These are what make contact with these two buttons on the front of the coils. So I'm going to drop this cover down. And now go fishing with these screws and try to find the holes. That was pretty easy. The top ones are tougher because the magnet pulls the screw around. Alright, now it's time to test it. I took the little screw plug thing out here for the lead wire outlet. I just have a piece of baling wire in here. I'm going to stick this in and tighten the nut down to hold it. And what's nice about using this wire is that you can bend it to any spark gap you want. You could hold it close or far away or whatever you desire. That seems to work pretty damn good. Let's see how big of a spark it'll do now. That's thickness of my finger, maybe half an inch. I don't know if it'll jump that. Oh wow. Man, you know what? I thought this mag was sparking good before on the bench, but compared to how it is now, I couldn't make a spark gap or a spark jump a gap like this. Well, everybody, that's about it. It's pretty basic. There's not a lot of witchcraft involved. If you were intimidated about taking apart a mag and fixing it before, hopefully you are no longer. So again, this is pretty similar to a Wico EK. Shop Dog Sam has a really good like 10 or 12 part series on how to rebuild a Wico EK, and that's where I learned how to do that, and I'm applying that knowledge to this. So check his videos out if you're interested in rebuilding an EK. He goes through the entire thing. And this is just more of a functional rebuild. It needed coils. I put coils in it. Bob's your auntie. So anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Hit the subscribe button down below if you haven't already and you want to stay up to date with all my new projects and toys and engines and how-to videos, so how to fix all this old junk. And if you're really so inclined, if you really like my videos, if you really want to see more, down in the description there, right below the video, there's going to be a Patreon account you can donate to, and a Gmail email that you can donate through PayPal if you feel so inclined. If you want to keep the engines in the garage and the beer in the fridge, I greatly appreciate it. I love making videos for you guys. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned for more.